The Sydney suburb of Darlinghurst went under a different name in the Depression years. In local slang, it was Razorhurst, a place where razor gangs ruled with glistening blades, and one of the great girl fights of Australian history played itself out in violent blows. The feud of crime queens Kate Leigh and Tilly Devine was a marriage of hatred. Till death do us part was one of its vows.
They were rivals in the world of crime. Kate was always very jealous of being known as the queen of the underworld. Tilly was always the queen of the bordellos. But they were always rivals to see who had attained the greatest notoriety.
Kate and Tilly really became rivals when the Razor Gang Wars broke out. There had always been gangs on the streets, but in 1927 we had the pistol licensing laws came in, which called for very heavy jail terms for anyone caught with a concealed weapon. So the crooks, instead of carrying pistols, armed themselves with razors. The other benefit of a razor was that it was a terrifying instrument, in that people usually gave up their money if they were confronted by a glistening blade in a glinting off a lamplight or something in the middle of a King's Cross lane.
Kate Leigh and Tilly Devine are both really interesting because they're both really strong women and both very successful at what they did. Kate, not just in prostitution, but more particularly in sly grog and in the 20s in cocaine as well. She was a real underworld entrepreneur. Tilly was, primarily successful as an exploiter of sex workers. And they both sort of staked themselves out as these flamboyant characters in furs and flash hats and diamond rings. Diamond rings were all the go, and they both tried to outdo each other to see who was the showiest person around.
In 1916, after a riot by 5,000 pub-crawling Anzacs outraged the public, Premier William Holman called a state of emergency and closed Sydney's pubs. This was the beginning of the 6 o'clock swill, and anybody thirsty after dark had to look elsewhere. Kate Leigh took advantage of a huge market and quickly set up sly grog shops.
They catered to everyone. There were upmarket ones and there were more downmarket ones. But businessmen, politicians, showbiz people of the day, going to Kate's, or Mum's as she was called, you'd knock on the door and say, "I was Mum in," and that was the password, and they'd come in and be able to stay there.
Tilly Devine capitalised on other victories of the moral lobby. The churches were pushing the government to stop prostitutes from street walking and men from living off their earnings. Tilly, as a woman, jumped through this loophole and quickly established herself as the untouchable madam in town.
Behind me there on the other side of the road is a pub that today is called the East Village, and it's a very salubrious establishment for the young people of the eastern suburbs. In Tilly Devine's day and Kate Leigh's day in the 1920s and 30s, it was a notorious bloodhouse known as the Tradesman's Arms. Tilly went to that pub most of her life because most of her brothels are in this immediate vicinity in Palmer Street, and there was never any shortage of customers there because there were factories around here then.
However, in that time she hadn't escaped the notice of the police either, because she had been arrested on 204 occasions for consorting, soliciting, and using indecent language, insulting words, riotous behaviour, and even on one occasion for grievous bodily harm.
For a while, Kate and Tilly coexisted, but as their empires grew, so did their desire to rule the roost. When Norman Broome, a Melbourne crime boss, attempted to take a foothold in the Sydney underworld, he was murdered. This brought the women's empires and egos into direct conflict.
The worst of the early battles that they had was when a Devine man, a fellow called Frankie Green, argued and fought with a guy called Gregory Gaffney, who was a Kate Leigh man, over a very beautiful prostitute called Nellie Cameron. And Gaffney pulled out a gun and shot Frank Green in the stomach. And Frank fled to the Devine's house. Unbeknownst to them, the Kate Leigh mob decided to come and finish the job that night. And armed with guns and pistols and knives, they attempted to storm into the house. Big Jim ran onto the porch with a rifle and shot Gregory Gaffney dead in the street and wounded 2 or 3 other people, including a gentleman by the name of Wally Tomlinson, who was Kate Leigh's lover at the time. So from then it became very personal.
Sydney's streets were bathed in blood by the two gangs for the next 2 years. The tabloid press held on like a dog with a bone. People began to talk of Darlinghurst as the Chicago of the South.
Here in Kellett Street in King's Cross, it's the middle of a very busy restaurant precinct. In the 1920s, it was the home of the razor gangs. And on August 9, 1929, the rival mobs of Tilly Devine and Kate Leigh met here and had one of the most violent riots that Sydney had ever seen. The two gangs went at each other for over an hour with razors and guns, and by the time it had finished, many of them were hospitalised with bullet wounds and slashes that required multiple stitches.
In 1930, the clampdown came. The New South Wales Police struck back, with Premier Jack Lang pushing through tough new laws that rang the death knell for the razor gangs.
What it dealt with was the problem that the law enforcers had of not being able to convict because of the conspiracy of silence amongst the underworld gangs. So they didn't have to prove that anyone had done anything. All they had to prove is that you were seen talking to someone who had a criminal record.
When the consorting laws came in 1930, life changed for Tilly and Kate. They were both getting older too. Kate by that stage was 50. Tilly was only 30, but she was a very worn 30. She'd had a very tough life. But her brothels and Kate's sly grog shops continued to operate throughout the 30s very, very profitably. And by the end of the 30s, both women were among the wealthiest in Sydney.
Age did not weary them, but the tone of their battle changed. They now used the media to further the feud, dobbing each other in and gilding the lily of their public image.
They actively engaged in what we would regard as PR. They, gave press interviews, they wrote letters to the paper, and they tried very hard to present an image, a benign image of themselves, and they're constantly accusing each other of being white slavers. But Kate was more successful, I think, in convincing people that she was actually a benign force, and she sort of set herself up as a bit of a Ned Kelly. Tilly, on the other hand, was less convincing because she was so mean, I think.
Despite surviving the Depression and 2 world wars, both empires began to crumble in the 50s. New, hungrier Crims emerged. But even hungrier than the Crims was the next man to come knocking, the taxman.
In 1950, things changed for poor Kate because the taxation officer pounced on her. She hadn't submitted taxation return until 1930 for £200. So anyway, they seized on all her possessions, her houses, her money, and then in the next 10 years she was practically friendless and penniless.
No longer the queens of the underworld, by the 60s the crooked dream was almost over for Kate and Tilly.
Kate was reduced to living in an upstairs room in Devonshire Street in Surrey Hills until she died in 1964. She had a stroke, fell down the stairs. She was poverty-stricken by that stage.
And over 700 people attended her funeral. There were criminals, there were police, there were identities of other years. All arrived to pay her the last tribute. Even Tilly Devine made her that gesture.
Tilly hung on amazingly until 1968, but she finally got out of the whole prostitution business when you had that new wave of organised crime, more associated with the heroin traffic of the late 60s, 70s. It got too dangerous for her again, and she didn't have any standover men left because they'd all been killed. When Tilly Devine died, people had forgotten her, and very few people, I think there's only a handful of people, actually bothered to show up to her funeral. And there's a story that when someone tried in a Darlinghurst pub to propose a toast to her, nobody could be bothered to even lift their glasses, which is a sad comment on someone who really did want to be admired, at least, if not loved.